EZD6 Quests is the first official supplement for DM Scotty McFarlane's beloved Rules Light EZD6 RPG, a game which I actually reviewed on this channel. I'll leave a link below to that video. This book of quests presents a very tried and true approach to RPG world building, which is to start small and add details to your world one game session at a time, rather than starting with a map of nations and continents. Just like the original EZD6 book, this one was released without any Kickstarter funding or massive fanfare or hype. The author, DM Scotty, and the co-creator and owner of the underlying label through which these books are published, Hanker Infernale / Brandish Gilhelm of Runehammer Games, are both YouTubers with pretty sizable followings relative to most in the RPG space, so maybe they just relied on that. Either way, it's sort of refreshing to not get hammered by hype and to just assess a game or supplement on its merits. The book itself runs 158 pages and contains 18 quests broken out into 3 major subtypes. In this video, I'm going to walk us through 2 of these quests, which does mean major spoilers for those, but also keep in mind that Scotty always encourages GMs to change, add, and remove details to fit their game, so the spoilers here are really pretty limited and relative. Also in this video, I'm going to recap my own personal experience running one of these quests as a GM, and what I liked and disliked about using Scotty's quest format. But first, let's take a look at the sponsor of this video, Ember Forge. This video is brought to you by Ember Forge, the makers of exquisite 3D printed metal dice that are finished by professional jewelers. They sell their dice sets on their Etsy shop, but have 2 new sets launching on Kickstarter. The Atlantean set, which is styled as a sort of Magitech treasure covered from a legendary long-sunken city, and the Yggdrasil set, styled after the World Tree in Norse legends. All their dice are hollow in design, so they aren't overly heavy like most metal dice that you see, but they're made of bronze, so that they're extremely durable. It's hard to put into words just how these dice feel in the hand and how they roll. They sort of sing when rolled together, and they're just extremely satisfying in terms of their heft and their construction. Ember Forge dice are for gamers who are ready to go to the next level with their game. You might start your collection with some inexpensive dice that do the job, then graduate to some slightly nicer plastic polyhedrals. Then you might get metal curious and mess around with some solid metal dice. But once you've been through that whole journey and you're ready to show up to your game with some heirloom quality dice, Ember Forge dice are what you get. Once you're rolling in style like this, there's no going back. Pledge to get your Atlantean and Yggdrasil sets on Kickstarter now, and make sure you check out their Giga dice, which are 1.5 times the size of the normal dice. Links are below. Alright, back to the video. Scotty starts off with the winning formula of stating that he doesn't want to make a book full of lore that competes with your unique game table. And he goes on to explain that he has been building a world with his players called Graxel, and it's built up one session at a time from player decisions and not a published book. He goes on to explain that smaller worlds work better than bigger worlds. Start small and you're likely to ensure that every town and every character matters more. The idea is to let the PCs be your guide. In EZD6, these are called the pushers and shovers, and in this quests book, they're referred to as the brazen. They are the driving engine for the creation of your world through their discoveries. It's funny because I think we've all made the mistake of starting a new homebrew world from the planetary tectonic scale, i.e. entire continents first. There are entire YouTube channels that even teach you how to make this mistake. We've all spent hours and hours drawing mountain ranges and lakes the size of Massachusetts, and massive islands with 1 or 2 defining features on them. But when we get those worlds to the table, the players either have to listen to your boring explanation of the whole planet that you thought of, or all that world building just goes out the window, since the characters are just tiny mortals starting in a single town or city, and none of those continents have any bearing anyway. So yeah, starting small and growing a world with the players is going to be the best approach to world building, unless you're playing a game where the players start as gods, demigods, or kings or something. The 18 quests detailed in this book are divided into lowly towns and small trials, greater adventures where the stakes are higher, and there is more allusion to a unifying force of evil in the land, and finally, an epic level series of adventures. I say level, but these aren't really categorized by level or difficulty ratings or anything like that. It's more that there are 3 levels of consequence for failure, where it gets more and more serious as you go down the categories. In this video, I want to walk through the very first quest on this list, the Beatdown Brothers, and one in the second category, the Plague of the Vermin, so that you can see how everything is organized, then take you through my experience of running the Plague of the Vermin. It should be noted that Scotty has run all of these adventures at his table at least once in some form or another, and they are all the distillation of the best moments and best elements from each of his and his players' experiences. Each quest runs an average of 8 pages, with the longest being 12 and this shortest one being 6. You get the information in brutally efficient form, starting with the main points. In the Beatdown Brothers, 2 meathead brothers, Lynn and Vem Calder, are annoying and terrorizing their little roadside village with all their bullying and pit fighting. But the slightly bigger problem is the fact that no one is noticing the encroachment of nasty reptilian hunters called Grulliks. So here you have some bullet points on the Calder brothers. And I first have to say that I love the illustrations in this book by Sean Bova. They just strike the right amount of old school with a certain kind of playfulness. But regarding these bullet points, it's a little hard to grab the mechanics that you need at a glance, since they're sort of entrenched in sentence form. You usually get a full page of NPCs formatted like this, and generally I really do like this format where you get a couple of bullet points each, just very straightforward. In this case, besides the Calder brothers, you get 4 main NPCs, a girl who's trying to warn the town about the Grulliks, the mother of the Nasty brothers, a repugnant mayor, and a hunter turned barkeep. Then over here you get some story beats. In this quest, you're meant to rope the PCs into a pit fight with one of the brothers at some point during a town festival, and then inject the appearance of the Grulliks. Grulliks come in 2 flavors, a tadpole, which has a few weak abilities, and a bull, which enjoys some tactical advantages when fighting on their own turf. Then you get a list of 20 possible details to throw at the players when they're investigating. And that's it for this quest. It's the epitome of efficiency and no-fluff presentation, and really great as a low-stakes one-shot. The 8th quest in this book, The Plague of the Vermin, is listed under the Darkness Falls section, where the quests have an elevated level of consequence if the PCs fail. In this case, a small city called Four Gates has been quarantined due to a virulent plague. Merchant princes contact the PCs and plead with them to find a cure in exchange for a generous reward. There is an alchemist in town named Otrix Craxton, who has been working on a cure that works temporarily, but spoiler, he's one of the culprits behind the plague. Once the PCs find Otrix's lab, they should be able to enter the dungeon-like undercity that contains the alchemist's true lab, as well as the dark powers that control Otrix himself. Here's an overview of the city. You'll notice that there are only 3 locations here, and this simplicity is something that you'll see again and again throughout the book. The quests are not sandboxes by any stretch. They are designed so that players will always be making forward progress and getting the clues they need to advance the story. In this case, the city of Four Gates is walled, and PCs enter through 1 gate. The idea is that they will 1. Get infected by a rat that spews vile fluids on them, and 2. Mosey on down to the town cemetery where they meet a couple of key NPCs. The forewoman Berwin is the first of these. She's overseeing the burial of bodies, but is asked by alchemist Otrix to send him the biggest and strongest bodies. The PCs are meant to follow her cart of bodies at some point and discover Otrix's lab. The second key NPC here is Might, a lab assistant who hates Otrix and will help the PCs enter the city's underground where his boss's secret lab is located. This list of bullet points describes the overground workshop and the secret laboratory below, and segues into a nice encounter with a lab monstrosity. Unfortunately, you don't get an illustration for every encounter, so if you want your session to be visual, you will need to source a lot of images yourself. One important minor enemy in this quest, for example, is the titular Verman, a sort of man-rat mutant. They're the epitome of what Otrix is doing in his experiments, and they get a nice written description here, but alas, no illustration. Here you get a very generic illustration of the party's path from the entrance of the Undercity to the final showdown, but to be honest, it's not what I would call a very functional map. And the bulleted information here also left me a bit cross-eyed since there are encounter details and enemies sort of crammed into bullet points. My solution here was just to transcribe the details I needed onto a separate piece of paper so that I could refer to the details quickly and easily. Anyway, there's this High Priest Verman the PCs face down here, as well as some more random details keyed to this quest. Some of the items are traps, while others are red herrings, and yet others are legitimate treasures and loot, so it's a pretty nice mix. Finally, there's the last confrontation, where PCs face off against a really nasty alchemist named Vile Brew Spewmaster, who has a lot of combat features that are nicely listed here. And finally, a giant rat statue comes to life, a sort of rat demigod, and players need to be smart about how to lay down enough damage on it to come out alive. The most interesting thing here is, listed in the aftermath, there is an allusion to a fragment of something called the Fallen, and mention of a deeper darkness. Whether you follow the arc presented in this book or use your own, the idea is that you want these one-shots to lead to bigger and bigger things, stronger enemies, larger stakes, and ever more dire consequences, and thusly your world grows. So I ran the Plague of Vermin, and here's how it went for me. First, I have to mention that I don't really do much theater of the mind, so I had to supplement a lot of the images for this quest. Since I had my own style in mind with computer-generated images, I went ahead and created all the artwork I needed from the ground up. The NPCs, the enemies, and the dungeon that didn't exist at all in the book. One thing is, by expanding this quest into a proper dungeon crawl, I had to make a few more enemies in order to mix things up a bit and get away from just rats and vermin, so I added 6 more enemy types for random encounters. In terms of prep, besides getting all the enemy stats in one convenient place for reference and lining up maps, there's not much that you need to do. Obviously, I went a little overboard with the generated images, but that stuff is just fun to make. In terms of the quest itself, it's a finely tuned one-shot containing the average number of NPCs, locations, and enemies that you would expect to use in a single session. All 18 of the quests in this book are like this, which makes it a pretty potent buy if you're in need of one-shot frameworks. In terms of world building, the quest didn't really stand out as a breeding ground of ideas for how to expand the world, but that's where the players are supposed to come in anyway. In my game, we were left with a few unanswered questions, some of them stemming from the quest itself, and some of them stemming from the PC's personal stories and backgrounds, and that's the whole point of Scotty's philosophy on world building. The fact is that the more you invest in your player stories, the more they'll give back to you in terms of building a world. I think in the end, EZD6 Quests is just more of DM Scotty giving us everything he's got, just like with the core rulebook. I wouldn't say that each of these quests is perfectly organized and laid out and ready for the table. You still have to consolidate some information here and there and sort some things out. But it's a pretty minimal amount of work, and the almost complete absence of fluff is greatly appreciated. That's in fact how he was even able to fit 18 one-shots in so few pages. Scotty built his homebrew world with these quests. The question is what you and your players can build with them. That's all for now. I'd love to hear your thoughts about world building down in the comments, as well as your experiences with EZD6. Links for everything are below. Thanks for watching. See ya.